Hey class, today we're going to talk about the topic of media bias. We're going to touch on political biases, whether the media is uh, more liberal or more conservative. Um, and by the way, the answer to that question is yes. Are they biased? Yes. Are they biased to the left? Yes. Are they biased to the right? Yeah, because it depends upon what you're looking at and who you are and your perception of the news. But we're also going to look at what I find to be more interesting, which is the professional biases inherent in the industry of journalism. And there'll be a reading associated with this idea, which I'll assign tomorrow, but which goes in a little bit more detail about these ideas that we'll explore. What I'd like you to do first, before we really go much further, is answer the following question in the Google Doc in your feedback form. What is media bias? Okay, just answer that question. What is media bias? Go and do that now. Now, I've assumed you've gone and done that. You paused the video and did that. So we're going to move on and talk about media bias. Okay, what is it? How do we define it? Is it strictly political bias? I mean, consider the media. The profession, these mass market industries that reach millions of households every day. TV, network, cable, the internet, newspapers, news magazines. We've talked in class about the different sources of news and the different sources of journalism, whether it's opinion or media. Well, my gosh, they're all driven by individuals, by people. And we all know that people have their own inherent biases. Now, the thing is that the media, the professional media, are supposed to be just that, professionals. So they're supposed to be able to keep their own media, their own professional their own biases out of the news because they're professionals, okay? And, I suppose the question of, is the media biased towards liberals? Yes, it is. Is the media biased towards conservatives? Yes, it is. And the reason I say that is because it depends upon what you're watching. Okay? And it depends upon who you are, what your view of the news is. Remember that question that I posed is kind of our operating question for the entire this subsection of this unit. How does the source of the news you consume affect the news you consume? How does where the information that you consider to be the news affect what information you get? Okay. And so today we're just going to talk about different forms of bias. All right. The first form is political. Okay. Now there's been a lot of ink spilled on this question of, is the media biased towards the left, towards the right? And I'll tell you what, if you are a conservative, you are convinced that the media is biased against conservatives. And if you're a liberal, you are convinced just as strongly that the media is biased against liberals. Okay. Now, how do you objectively consider something like this? Well, there's been any number of efforts. The Media Research Center conducted polling back in 1992. Now, granted, that was a long time ago. But they conducted polling right around the time of the 1992 presidential election, and they took a poll of the Washington-based reporters, and the results are pretty astonishing. This is the election that involved Bill Clinton challenging the sitting president, George H.W. Bush, and Ross Perot. And what that survey found was that 89% of the media in Washington, D.C. preferred Bill Clinton, okay, as this pie chart shows you. Okay, 89% preferred Bill Clinton. 7% preferred George H.W. Bush, and 2% preferred Ross Perot. Now, whether that's how they actually voted or not, we don't know the answer to that question, but I suppose that would suggest a pretty monolithic agreement politically about which candidate was preferred. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think today, if media members were asked, hey, do you prefer President Obama or Mitt Romney in this 2012 election, how many do you think would say it's none of your business, or I'm a professional, I don't have to answer that question, or I refuse to answer that question? And I'll bet you the answer would be a lot. Okay, just look at the results from the 2004 poll that asked how journalists voted in 2004. Did you vote for the sitting president, George W. Bush? Did you vote for John Kerry, the Democratic challenger? Or do you prefer not to answer the question? Well, as you can see, 52% of the journalists said, I voted for John Kerry. 19% said, I voted for George W. Bush. And 21% said, it's none of your business. Okay? Now, you can look at that polling in any number of ways, and that's what I'd like you to do right now. Pause the video and write down in the Google form, how would you interpret that information? And you might compare it to the 1992 results. You might just look at that and see something else. I don't know. Write down your thoughts. Now come back. So pause the video and come back. Okay, now I assume you've done that in the Google form, and we're going to move on. The 2008 Pew Research Center survey of 222 journalists reveals that 30% self-identified as liberal or very liberal, 53% called themselves moderate, and 8% called themselves conservative or very conservative. And presumably the 9%, the 9% that didn't respond basically said, buzz off, I'm not answering your question. Again, you can interpret this information in any number of ways, but I would suggest to you that one of the interpretations is, boy, more people are choosing either to identify themselves as moderate or not identify themselves at all, trusting that, hey, look, I'm a professional, I can keep my personal biases out of my job. Okay. Well, enough about political bias, because quite frankly, there's no real way to answer that question except judging by your own sense of watching the news and saying, boy, that sounds like that lady is pretty conservative in her presentation of this otherwise objective news story. Or, wow, that guy sounds really liberal. He's really giving it to the Republican lawmaker that he's interviewing. And then you make that decision for yourself. If you like that, fantastic. If you don't like that, change the channel. More interesting to me is the structural media bias, the biases that are just built into journalism. These are inherent. They're part of the journalistic practice because of the way that journalism is consumed by millions of people in America. I mean, look at it this way. Between TV, network, cable, the internet, radio, whether it's news talk or straight news shows, again, the internet is huge, obviously. People are individuals. They have difficulty, most people have great difficulty keeping their own inherent biases out of the news. And then you can't forget that news companies are in it to make money. Okay, the commercial bias, this first bias, is endemic. All right, you want to make money. You want to draw eyeballs to your product. Okay, you want people to look at your product. You want people to buy your newspaper, to listen to your radio, to watch your TV show, because that's how you make money. Advertisers pay you to run ads on your TV shows based on how many people watch. So if a story has lots of shiny colors and or bright colors and shiny stuff happening, people are going to watch it. All right. New news, temporal bias. The new and fresh ideas are much more attractive than stuff that happened a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. Okay? That just draws more attention. Okay? Something happening just 5 minutes ago is more interesting than something that happened 5 days ago. A visual bias. If something certainly looks pretty, if something is kind of a cool image, like, we're a very visual people. We are a very visual media culture. And TV and certainly the internet is going to be drawn towards something that can have an image attached to it. I mean, look at it this way. My ugly mug is down in the bottom corner of this video precisely because all sorts of research shows that kids who are watching a online presentation tend to be more attentive when their teacher's head can actually be seen in the video. We're a very visual people. Okay, a bad news bias. Boy, it's a scary world out there. Look how scary it is. Here's a story about some horrible event. Bad news sells. Whether it's because people like to hear bad things happening to other people, whether there's some vicarious sense of, whew, thank goodness that's not me, or it didn't happen to anybody I love. Whatever it is, bad news sells. A narrative bias. Tell me a story. And every story, has a beginning, a middle, an end. A good guy, a bad guy. But the world isn't necessarily like that. There isn't necessarily somebody wearing a white hat being the good guys and somebody wearing a black hat being the bad guys. And yet the media kind of likes that structure for their news stories because it helps people follow the story that otherwise might be a very complex issue. The status quo bias. The media is invested in the system that we have today, and they don't question the system. All right, whether it's the political system, the economic system, social system, they don't question it. In the vast majority of cases, they don't question it. They might make fun of it, but they don't question it. The Jon Stewarts, these guys might poke fun at stuff, but they're not seriously challenging why we have the system that we have. Okay, because they're a part of it. Their power, their influence is directly derived from their access to the power brokers. Okay, the people in power. There's a fairness bias. Every story seems to have this, well, here's what this guy says, so let's hear from the other side. Well, that artificially creates opposition, all right? And it might accent the oppositional nature of our politics or of our system when it's really not necessary to talk about. The expedience bias. News that just happened, we need to get it out. And if it's incorrect, you know what, we'll apologize. But better to get the news out quick than to have it necessarily be completely accurate. And I'm sure we can all think of examples where news was inaccurately presented, and people, the news agency just kind of shrugged and said, well, yeah, but we got it to you first. Glory bias. I mean, the very job of being a journalist tends to see the person insert themselves into the news. I mean, Geraldo Rivera, when he was covering a story about cosmetic surgery, had his forehead implanted with Botox, so that the camera's got a tight vision of his face, and he became part of the story. And it's one extreme example, but the point is that journalists, whether they're standing outside covering Hurricane Katrina and they're being blown sideways as they're reporting the news, or whether they're standing outside a burning building, or whatever it is, they want to be on the scene, they want to be part of the story. Hey, look, I'm important, I'm here too. All right, these are all inherent biases. Now, I want you to keep in mind that historical context, which is, look, objective news never really ever existed until after World War II. Most sources of news in American history were biased. Think yellow journalism. And the best we can do is ask our consumers of the news to determine for him or herself what the news means. I'll see you guys in class tomorrow.